Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the silk-lined, incense-scented world of medieval royalty. But not the fairy tale kind. No, tonight you've been reborn as a princess in the House of Habsburg, where the biggest threat to the throne isn't war or scandal, it's the family gene pool. Welcome to a place where dinner conversations sound like family reunions, your fiancé probably shares your grandfather, and everyone has the same slightly unfortunate chin. So, before you get completely cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. And let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time it is for you. I always find it fascinating to see who's joining this sleepy little journey worldwide. Now turn off the lights, maybe switch on a soft fan if you like that gentle background hum, and let's slip quietly into tonight's adventure. You wake up in a cold but lavish stone chamber, where every curtain, carpet, and doorknob bears the insignia of a noble house. Outside the small window, the morning mist curls like breath. A breeze stirs the delicate lace canopy above your head, and it hits you. You're not in the 21st century anymore. The room smells of beeswax candles and long-stored cloaks. A bronze mirror in the corner reflects your face, unfamiliar yet still yours. Hair pinned up, a hand-woven nightgown, and a very prominent chin. You tilt your head. That chin has personality, possibly too much of it. The door opens. A maid enters, carrying a tray of tea and a wedding dress. "Good morning, princess," she whispers. "Today is your betrothal day." You freeze. To whom? "Lord Leopold, my lady, son of Count Rudolph, who is your mother's brother, and also the grandson of the late Empress, who was your father's maternal aunt." You're silent, not because you don't understand, but because you don't know whether to be horrified or impressed by the structural complexity of this family tree. You get dressed. The maid helps you into a gown that has survived multiple generations, meaning it's been worn by at least 4 blood relatives. The fabric is worn thin at the waist, where it was once cinched by your cousin aunt 3 generations ago. You try to breathe normally, but the high collar brushes your jaw so tightly that you can hear your heartbeat echo. Then, you're led into the Great Hall. Breakfast is underway with at least 10 people at the table, 9 of whom share a common ancestor with you no farther back than 4 generations. They eat toast and chat as if swapping rare postage stamps. A silver-haired aunt peers at you and smiles. She has her mother's ears, but that chin, that's clearly from her father's side. You smile politely. No one needs to know you're fantasizing about burying your face in a bread loaf and vanishing from this genealogical reunion. At noon, you meet your fiancé, Leopold. He enters with a regal posture, cloaked in navy with golden trim. And when you look directly at his face, your stomach sinks. He looks exactly like you. You can imagine him in your silk scarf and your mother's perfume. "A pleasure to see you again," he says in a perfectly even tone. "We once played together, when you were 3, at my cousin's baptism, who was also your cousin." You nod and force a smile. "Yes, I remember. The raisin cake was lovely." That afternoon, you study etiquette with an elderly noblewoman. She teaches you how to bow without dislodging your headpiece, raise a wine glass without exposing your elbow, and, of course, hold your face at a perfect 3/4 angle so your chin looks commanding, but not declarative. You understand why every family portrait has that same distant, side-facing gaze toward a window. Perhaps in each of those moments, your ancestors were also wondering, "Is anyone in this room not related to me?" You're seated at a mahogany desk by evening, writing in the leather-bound journal gifted on your coming of age. The first page bears a pre-written inscription: "Our bloodline, glorious and pure." You sigh, flip to a blank page, and write, Day 1. I'm about to marry someone with the same eyes, the same chin, and possibly the same blood type. Outside, chapel bells toll softly. You pull the blanket around your shoulders and lie still in the silent stone room. No cars, no emails, no texts from strangers. Just the wind and the quiet question. If I were born here, could I choose a different path? And as moonlight pours in through the window, you close your eyes and whisper a quiet promise, just to yourself. If I am the result of 1,000 years of tightly wound matchmaking, then I will be the first to untangle a branch. You're sleeping soundly when you're awakened by the soft rustle of silk and someone clearing their throat as gently as a breeze. A familiar female voice speaks beside your ear, soothing but radiating the kind of energy only 3 cups of peppermint tea can provide. Princess, the sun is up. It's time for your skincare. Before you even open your eyes, 3 hands gently lift your arms, 2 more steady your shoulders, and a 6th, from who knows where, is already untangling your hair. A typical royal morning, where you don't wake up naturally. You are ceremonially launched into consciousness. You open your eyes. 6 maids surround your bed, each assigned to a specific body part. Nearby stands a silver-haired aunt, or maybe a great-aunt, familiar in that indistinct family tree spiderweb way. She watches you like she's about to conduct an interview. "Did you sleep well?" she asks softly, sounding like your answer will be recorded in the family archive. You nod, still unable to fully close your mouth because... chin. She nods approvingly and claps 3 times. Immediately, one maid steps forward with a warm towel, another sets a basin of scented water at your feet, and a third begins sprinkling dried flowers into your hairbrush. You're now the center of a self-care ceremony you had 0 creative control over. While brushing your hair, you glance into the bronze mirror on your vanity. Your hair has been swept into a gentle side wave, and behind you stands the aunt, flipping through a family genealogy tome the size of a sacred text. She's reviewing upcoming marriage arrangements within the family, occasionally eyeing you like she's verifying genetic codes. You whisper, "Is there something you need?" She replies, "Just checking if, after you marry Leopold, we can consider aligning with the Naples branch." You're unsure whether to feel honored, or like a cog in the Habsburg matchmaking machine. After your hair is done, and your skin is dabbed with almond oil, imported from Greece because the Habsburgs refused to apply anything to the face without at least one attached mythological backstory. You're dressed in your morning gown. Not just any dress. This is the first of 4 you'll wear today. Each layer has meaning. The first for purity, the second for bloodline, the third for duty, and the final one to hide the chin. You step into your dress like entering a velvet-lined box and exhale slowly. At least today, I'm not marrying anyone new. A maid leads you down the hallway, where morning light streams through stained glass and casts shimmering patterns on the cold stone floor. The aunt sticks to you like a determined chaperone shadow as you try to glide gracefully in your lead-heavy leather shoes. Remember, you have posture rehearsal before the banquet, yes? You nod, and you must practice tilting your head in a way that conceals your jawline. Another nod. And don't linger too long near the Prince of Tyrol. We're reserving him for your cousin. You don't nod. You bow slightly with tactical intent. You arrive at the breakfast chamber, where the table is already set. Hard bread, pungent cheese, and last season's fruit preserves await. Everyone eats delicately, knowing the most essential part of breakfast is sitting in the correct order. Every chair is numbered, and you must sit beside the person close enough in lineage to claim kinship, but not so close it triggers whispers. Today you're seated next to a girl your age in a soft violet dress. She tilts her head politely. "4th cousin, twice removed. We met when I was teething." You smile graciously. "Ah, yes. I hadn't learned how to keep my mouth closed yet. After the meal, you're escorted to the etiquette room. A stern governess waits, clutching a tome titled Grace in Motion. Today's lesson: how to cross a carpet without your skirt catching wind. You walk, bow, pivot, pause. Every move is corrected by a surgical ahem. You wonder, do men have to learn this? The governess reads your mind. Men learn to stand still and marry who they're told. Women, we learn how to make it look like our idea. You take another lap, unsure whether to laugh or cry. After class, you're invited to take fresh air in the garden. But even there, you are never alone. Two maids follow 3 steps behind. An aunt feigns reading on a stone bench. A guard stands beneath a tree, pretending not to watch, but watching. You sit. You look up. No clouds. No cars. Just swallows circling and the whisper of silk skirts in the breeze. You close your eyes, thinking, it's not even noon, and I've been proposed to, genetically screened, taught to bow, and warned not to flirt without committee approval. You exhale. Long. Quiet. Maybe this is just a normal day in the life of a Habsburg princess. That afternoon, you're invited into the castle's genealogical archive, affectionately known as the Lineage Labyrinth. It doesn't just house books and scrolls, but towering bloodline maps drawn in snail ink, stretched from ceiling to floor. The moment you step in, it feels like you've fallen into a puzzle game with no way out. Before you stand a massive hand-drawn chart featuring over 300 names linked by lines, arrows, and symbols of questionable sanity. Some names intersect 3 times. Others appear twice, or even thrice, under titles like brother-in-law, maternal grandson, and former husband of the aunt now wife. An elderly clerk with spectacles and a pointer greets you with the enthusiasm of someone who's just found a logical error in Holy Scripture. "Good afternoon, Princess," he says, beaming. "Today we'll review your exact location in the family tree. Preliminary analysis shows that you're the granddaughter of King Charles II, and also the niece of his sister. But you're also the cousin of the man you were betrothed to yesterday, who happens to be the future son-in-law of your great aunt." You stare silently, eyes trailing across the map. It feels like watching a lace tablecloth get caught in a sewing machine. Tangled, overwhelming, and impossible to fix without tearing everything apart. "Oh, and here's a fun twist," the clerk continues, utterly delighted. "If we fold the family tree from its origin to your current node, your branch overlaps almost exactly with your great-great-grandfather's. A perfect genetic loop." You nod politely while mentally screaming, "If my child marries my cousin's child, what would I call them?" You try to follow the logic, but the longer you look, the more the names blur. Every connecting line feels like an uncooked spaghetti strand thrown into a bowl of genealogical alphabet soup. Somewhere in that room, your name appears in at least 4 locations, like you've taken on multiple roles in your biopic. "This," the clerk explains, "is why choosing a husband is such a serious duty. We consider not only political advantage, but also the elegance of hereditary closure." You whisper, "Sir, if we keep circling around like this, is anyone here even technically a stranger anymore?" He smiles gently. "That's the beauty of it. In this house, no one is a stranger." It's a statement that is both heartwarming and mildly terrifying. You step out of the room, your brain still spinning. Wandering the castle hallway lined with ancestral portraits, you pass face after face that looks oddly familiar. One has your eyebrows, another has your nose, and the one in the center, the jaw, that unmistakable Habsburg chin. The plaque reads, "Juana of Austria, mother of the Empire." You whisper, "If she's the mother of the Empire, Am I marrying the empire itself? You sit beside the window, trying to jot down everything you've heard. But the more you write, the more you feel stuck in a poem without rhyme, penned by people who love tradition and hated surprises. A young maid approaches with a cup of tea. She looks at you quietly, then asks, "Do you ever feel tired of never having truly chosen someone who wasn't chosen for you first?" You blink. A strange question, but an honest one. You reply, "Sometimes I feel like I'm just playing a part in a script written by my ancestor 5 generations ago." She chuckles softly. "At least your character has beautiful costumes." You laugh. Fair enough. As the sun sets, you stroll through the royal orchard. The air is crisp, yet your mind is tangled with names and branches. With every step, you feel like you're walking across history, and history in turn is wrapping around you like an endless tapestry. You sit under an apple tree. A fruit thuds softly onto the ground. You stare at it thinking, if Adam and Eve were the first ancestors, then maybe my family runs the official Forbidden Fruit Conservation Society. Dusk settles in. You return to your chambers, your mind spinning like a genealogical compass. Climbing into bed, you pull the blanket close. Your chin hits the pillow a full second before your forehead does. And in the quiet of the night, you murmur, "If I'm my cousin, then may I at least have the good sense to become my own best friend first." The next morning, as you're leisurely enjoying millet porridge with honey in the side dining room, Aunt Margareta, the family's legendary living archive, suddenly appears beside your table, holding a ledger larger than your entire breakfast. It's the family's marriage registry, thick, heavy, and smelling like a bookshelf untouched since the days of the first patriarch. She doesn't greet you. She just sits and begins. "You know, marrying Leopold is a very smart choice made by our ancestors. A bit of bourbon blood mixed into the Habsburg line helps stabilize the nose and forehead. As for the chin, well, everyone has a standout feature." You freeze mid-spoon. That sentence alone leaves you unsure whether to laugh or take notes. Then she continues, steady as a royal clock. "Inbreeding is how we protect purity. Did you know your great-great-great-grandfather once said, 'We don't let noble genes fall into foreign hands'?" You nod mechanically, thinking only, maybe the genes are noble, but this kind of nobility feels too confident. After breakfast, you walk into the grand hall, where a council of aunts, great-aunts, and a few uncles has gathered, the family's official matchmaking and reproduction committee. They sit in a circle, each with a mini family tree, a glass of wine, and the scrutinizing gaze of someone choosing where best to plant an exotic vine. "Little Isadora is 17 now," one woman announces as loud as church bells. "She's got blood from both Naples and Austria. We're saving her for the Prince of Lorraine. But he's only 8. Perfect. That gives us time to prepare." You sit there feeling like you've stumbled into a medieval matchmaking summit. Every relative is a genetic algorithm trying to calculate the least buggy version of an ancient code. You quietly slip away, hoping for a calmer spot. But down the south hallway, you're intercepted by the court's female scholars teaching the young ladies. Today's lecture, Habsburg Marriages, from love to logistics. You're invited to sit in, and once seated, there's no escape. "The most romantic tale," the teacher begins, "is that of Emperor Maximilian and Maria of Burgundy. They were first cousins, but their love laid the foundation of an empire." You cautiously ask, "Has anyone in our history ever married someone not related?" The teacher pauses. Then he says, "Well, there was one, but he's remembered as the rebel. No one mentions him at dinner. You nod. Take notes. And quietly think, a rebellion of the heart. Sounds kind of sweet. After the lecture, you and several ladies are brought to the portrait gallery. A long, echoing hall filled with wedding paintings of famed ancestral couples. Each pair was in formal garb, smiling softly and looking unsettlingly alike. A girl next to you whispers, "See that pair? They're my great-grandparents, first cousins." You try to smile. "Yeah, that's clear." You stop at a large portrait of a couple holding hands. The woman's face looks eerily familiar. That chin, those eyes. You murmur, "Looks like me." A gentle voice behind you says, "That's your great-great-grandmother. Married 3 relatives. Almost married her brother once. Luckily, someone noticed in time." You turn. It's the elderly butler, smiling kindly, holding a pot of peppermint tea. You say nothing. Your mind is now a remix of royal lineage played on a loop. Back in your room, you pour a glass of cold water, then open your journal and write just one line. Here, inbreeding isn't taboo, it's tradition, and I'm living in a tradition, shaped like a chin. Night falls. You crawl into bed, pulling the blanket high. A strange feeling drifts through you. Part history class, part existential loop. And softly, barely audible, you whisper, "If love is freedom, maybe I'm falling in love inside a very beautiful prison." This morning, you wake up to the scent of frankincense and the distant echo of string instruments drifting down the hallway. A maid enters solemnly, holding a large portrait, which she sets beside your bed. Before you can even yawn, she announces, "Princess, today marks the anniversary of your parents' engagement. A momentous occasion, one we must study and remember." You sit up, still hazy, and look at the old portrait. The 2 figures gaze off toward some distant point, both at the same angle, with the same look in their eyes and the same firm jawline. After a moment, you realize that if you squint and glance, it's nearly impossible to tell which one is the mother and which is the father. The maid gently unfurls a scroll before you, a handwritten replica of the original engagement record, inked in brown and decorated with flourishes that look suspiciously like genetic spirals. "You know," she whispers, "they fell in love the very first time they met, at the wine festival in Innsbruck. Everyone said, 'What a perfect match,' like looking in a mirror." You swallow, unsure whether to feel touched or mildly chilled. Mirrors can be lovely, but falling for someone because they resemble you feels a little tangled. The entire day is dedicated to revisiting your parents' romance, a story considered exemplary in the palace. They first met at the wedding of a distant maternal cousin. Their first conversation, about bloodlines and marital policy. Their first dance, prompted by realizing they both descended from the same great-grandmother. You're led to the family library, where love letters between your parents are preserved in oak boxes. You read a few lines. They're not like any love letters you've read in fairy tales. There's no longing, no aching. Instead, "I hold you in esteem, for you bear the Austrian ears and the Spanish nose of my lineage. I was truly moved to see your forehead measures the same as our great-grandmother's." You look up from the parchment. Your heart doesn't flutter. It pauses, quietly. Then, it's time for the traditional portrait viewing. You're brought to the side gallery, where rare paintings depict royal couples and private moments. Your parents stand at the center of one, dressed in wedding regalia, fingers lightly touching, their gaze strikingly similar. The artist worked hard to make them look alike, enough that you might mistake them for twins cosplaying as newlyweds. Aunt Margareta, who has an uncanny ability to appear just as you're trying to rest, remarks with pride, Ours is one of the rare families to maintain visual consistency across generations. No surprises ever. You think, perhaps that's because everyone looks exactly like everyone else. That evening, you're shown manuscripts and sketches of your parents' wedding, illustrations of your father bowing, them seated at the ancestor altar and pouring wine in ritual. Every detail is noted, even when your father nearly confused your mother's grandmother with his own. You take notes, not because you're required, but because you've begun to wonder, what made the generations before you choose to live this way? Looping, enclosed, content with the same familiar mirror. You ask yourself, if my parents were thrilled, maybe they didn't see it as strange. But if that happiness came from never daring to think otherwise, should I follow? There's no answer. Just the evening bell, pulling you from your thoughts. Back in your room, you sit before the mirror, watching the candlelight reflect your eyes, nose, and that legacy-bound chin. You smile, softly, faintly, not quite sadly. You open your journal and write, "They loved each other because they were alike. But I'm not sure I can do that. When every time I look at him, I see myself staring back." That night, the wind whispers through the shutters. You lie still beneath the covers and drift into sleep with a single lingering question. Does love truly need sameness? Or is it a difference that makes us unforgettable? The next morning, before the first rays of sunlight could warm the cold stone floor of the hallway, you were awakened by the breakfast bell. A steady, echoing sound so familiar it made you feel like you were living inside a grandfather clock. A maid brought a light hand-woven wool robe, placed a pair of soft shoes by the bed, and whispered, "You say nothing. Your mind is now a remix of royal lineage played on a loop." Back in your room, you pour a glass of cold water, then open your journal and write just one line. Here, inbreeding isn't taboo, it's tradition, and I'm living in a tradition, shaped like a chin. Night falls. You crawl into bed, pulling the blanket high. A strange feeling drifts through you. Part history class, part existential loop. And softly, barely audible, you whisper, "If love is freedom, maybe I'm falling in love inside a very beautiful prison." This morning, you wake up to the scent of frankincense and the distant echo of string instruments drifting down the hallway. A maid enters solemnly, holding a large portrait, which she sets beside your bed. Before you can even yawn, she announces, "Princess, today marks the anniversary of your parents' engagement. A momentous occasion, one we must study and remember." You sit up, still hazy, and look at the old portrait. The two figures gaze off toward some distant point, both at the same angle, with the same look in their eyes and the same firm jawline. After a moment, you realize that if you squint and glance, it's nearly impossible to tell which one is the mother and which is the father. The maid gently unfurls a scroll before you, a handwritten replica of the original engagement record, inked in brown and decorated with flourishes that look suspiciously like genetic spirals. "You know," she whispers, "they fell in love the very first time they met, at the wine festival in Innsbruck. Everyone said, 'What a perfect match,' like looking in a mirror." You swallow, unsure whether to feel touched or mildly chilled. Mirrors can be lovely, but falling for someone because they resemble you feels a little tangled. The entire day is dedicated to revisiting your parents' romance, a story considered exemplary in the palace. They first met at the wedding of a distant maternal cousin. Their first conversation, about bloodlines and marital policy. Their first dance, prompted by realizing they both descended from the same great-grandmother. You're led to the family library, where love letters between your parents are preserved in oak boxes. You read a few lines. They're not like any love letters you've read in fairy tales. There's no longing, no aching. Instead, I hold you in esteem, for you bear the Austrian ears and the Spanish nose of my lineage. I was truly moved to see your forehead measures the same as our great-grandmother's. You look up from the parchment. Your heart doesn't flutter. It pauses, quietly. Then, it's time for the traditional portrait viewing. You're brought to the side gallery, where rare paintings depict royal couples and private moments. Your parents stand at the center of one, dressed in wedding regalia, fingers lightly touching, their gaze strikingly similar. The artist worked hard to make them look alike, enough that you might mistake them for twins cosplaying as newlyweds. Aunt Margareta, who has an uncanny ability to appear just as you're trying to rest, remarks with pride, "Ours is one of the rare families to maintain visual consistency across generations. No surprises ever." You think, perhaps that's because everyone looks exactly like everyone else. That evening, you're shown manuscripts and sketches of your parents' wedding, illustrations of your father bowing, them seated at the ancestor altar and pouring wine in ritual. Every detail is noted, even when your father nearly confused your mother's grandmother with his own. You take notes, not because you're required, but because you've begun to wonder, what made the generations before you choose to live this way? Looping, enclosed, content with the same familiar mirror. You ask yourself, if my parents were thrilled, maybe they didn't see it as strange. But if that happiness came from never daring to think otherwise, should I follow? There's no answer. Just the evening bell, pulling you from your thoughts. Back in your room, you sit before the mirror, watching the candlelight reflect your eyes, nose, and that legacy-bound chin. You smile, softly, faintly, not quite sadly. You open your journal and write, "They loved each other because they were alike. But I'm not sure I can do that. When every time I look at him, I see myself staring back." That night, the wind whispers through the shutters. You lie still beneath the covers and drift into sleep with a single lingering question. Does love truly need sameness? Or is it a difference that makes us unforgettable? The next morning, before the first rays of sunlight could warm the cold stone floor of the hallway, you were awakened by the breakfast bell. A steady, echoing sound so familiar, it made you feel like you were living inside a grandfather clock. A maid brought a light hand-woven wool robe, placed a pair of soft shoes by the bed, and whispered, "Practically every grandparent, aunt, uncle, cousin, and people who were somehow both had been painted, named, framed, and sorted meticulously by bloodline." You stepped inside and were immediately greeted by yourself. Or at least someone who looked like you but with a higher collar and a more distant gaze. A guide gently invited you to begin at the central progenitor portrait. He, the great patriarch, had the signature Habsburg chin, lips pressed tight, and a gaze that seemed to judge every descendant through the centuries. "This is where all glory began," the guide said in a tone trained since birth. "He married his Spanish cousin, who later became the mother of his sister-in-law's brother-in-law." You nodded. Not because you understood, but because you didn't know where to begin asking. You were led along the first wall displaying kings and queens. Each wore a distinct robe and crown, yet their faces were eerily consistent. It felt as if only two painters had rotated through 200 years, using a single face template. Long eyes, high nose, assertive chin. You stopped at a strange portrait. The woman's skin was paler, her eyes rounder, and, most notably, she lacked the legendary chin, a conspicuous absence. You whispered, "Who is she?" The guide lowered his voice. "That's Eleonora, daughter of an unrecorded union. Rumor says her mother was Italian nobility. but not related to the family. You went silent, stepped back, and examined the portrait more closely. Eleonora was smiling, a genuine smile, no pressed lips, no three-quarters tilt. She looked happy. You moved on to the marital portraits. Most featured couples side by side, hands gently touching, expressions serene. But the longer you looked, the more they resembled faded photocopies. Later, artists tried to refresh the pieces with outfit changes and background swaps, but the facial sameness was impossible to mask. In one corner was the Maximum Consanguinity collection, not an official label, but one used by everyone in the palace. These portraits featured couples so closely related that a single mirror might have sufficed for both. One painting you couldn't even look at for more than 3 seconds. Husband and wife seemed so identical. You weren't sure which was the original. The guide explained, that generation reached the pinnacle of purity. You thought, or the pinnacle of refusing to look outside the window. You stopped before the final portrait, newer than the rest. Your parents' painting, your father in deep blue velvet, your mother in crimson red, standing beneath a laurel tree, hands entwined. They weren't smiling, but they weren't stern either. Just identical. You stared at it for a long time. Aunt Margareta once said, "We don't let heritage slip away. Every face is a printed piece of history." You whispered, "But what about feelings?" A maid appeared to offer a rest for your eyes in the small garden. You left the gallery with a weight heavier than the walnut wood frames. Outside, you sat on a stone bench and looked at blooming roses, each one a different hue. Each petal has a different shape. You pulled out your notebook and wrote a single line. There are things portraits can't hide, and things they never show. What happens after the curtain falls? You closed the notebook, stood up and thought, if I ever have my portrait painted, I'll ask to be drawn facing left, so the chin hides in shadow, and the gaze can finally look past the wall. The next morning, just as you hoped to rest after a long, chin-filled morning in the portrait gallery, a servant held a thick ledger and announced, "Your Highness, today is your scheduled health check with the royal physician. Please proceed to the examination room." You froze. Not because you feared needles. No one in this era had invented a needle small enough to be called gentle. You hesitated because the Habsburg family physician was unlike any doctor you'd ever known. He didn't just treat illness with medicine, but with spontaneous genealogy. You entered the cold, herb-scented room. Someone had recently burned cardamom with vinegar and a few unidentifiable roots. The royal physician, an older man with ash-white hair, thick magnifying glasses, and 2 layers of robes, sat at a desk with copies of the family tree. "Ah, princess," he rasped, full of enthusiasm. "Come in. Today we will assess your genetic stability and the quantity of noble blood." You sat down. He pulled out a personalized family tree chart and marked your name in red. "Let's begin. First, I need to examine the percentage of inheritance from your paternal Spanish line. If I recall correctly, you carry about 37% of the genes from your great-grandmother's ancestor, who suffered from migraines but never had hives." You nodded, not understanding a word but too polite to interrupt. He continued, "We'll start with the left ear. The left ear tends to show Austrian gene traits more clearly." You opened your mouth and almost laughed, but his seriousness pulled you back into solemn mode. "Yes. Tilt your head slightly. Keep the chin steady. Excellent." He tilted his head, observed closely, and jotted a line of notes as long as a spell. Then he checked your pulse by comparing it to your deceased grandmother's heart rate, based on records from 70 years ago. "When your ancestor was your age," he muttered, "her pulse was 68. You're at 71, a little high. Likely from your mother's side. The Bavarian branch tends to be impatient. You sat still as he measured your tongue length, the distance between your pupils, the curve of your fingernails, and, most strangely, your skin's bounce when tapped. "Very good," he finally said after nearly an hour. "You may experience mild hereditary headaches after age 25, but nothing serious. Just avoid marrying into the secondary Lorraine line. The combined genetics could result in excessively deep inbreeding. Understood?" You nodded like a robot, thinking, "I'll probably remember that more while baking than while choosing a husband." Before you left, he handed you a small pouch. "This tea is formulated for your genes, blended from herbs of your maternal line and traditional Spanish chamomile. Drink on cloudy days with a southern breeze." You stepped out of the room feeling less like a patient and more like a royal decree had just been read over your DNA. In the hallway, you spotted a maid carrying a steaming potion bottle. "Who's that for?" you asked. "For Lady Camilla, miss. She just discovered she shares 80% of her genes with her great-grandmother's former husband. The physician recommends herbal fumigation to stabilize her emotions." You nodded, unsure when medicine had started resembling genealogical feng shui. That afternoon, you opened your journal, seated by the window, and wrote, "I have no fever, no cough, no backache. But because my great-grandmother disliked cats, I'm advised not to keep four-legged pets. Our physician doesn't treat illness. He treats ancestral photocopies." You leaned back, stared at the carved oak ceiling, and wondered, if I'm a unique gene assembly, do I have the right to create something new? Or am I just the next step in a design shaped by others? Evening fell. You hugged your pouch of herbal tea and lay on the bed. Candlelight flickered by your pillow, casting shadows across the wall of framed genealogy charts like fine art. You smiled, tired but soft, and whispered, "I'm not sick today. I'm just inherited." After yesterday's genealogy-based health check, you thought today might finally bring some rest. But in a noble family with an impressive inbreeding ratio, relaxation doesn't exist. Instead of sleeping in, you were awakened by a familiar knock and voice. "Princess, it's time for your etiquette and expressive speech lesson." You exhaled and threw off the blanket. This morning would involve no poetry, music, or philosophy. Today's lesson was about how not to spray royal saliva during the conversation, a crucial skill in court where a misplaced ahem could cause diplomatic disaster. You were led to a small pinewood room with a long table and a giant mirror tilted against the wall. Your instructor, Professor Ludwig, was already sitting there, clad in a gray robe, balding, with precisely groomed whiskers and eyes sharp as a sewing needle. He didn't greet you with words, but with a nod calibrated to the millimeter. "We shall begin," he said. "Today, the princess will practice double consonants and learn how to adjust jaw tension to prevent excess wobbling." You sat upright. In front of you, the massive mirror reflected a version of yourself, pressing your lips together like you were about to swear an oath. Ludwig placed a thick, leather-bound book in front of you titled Noble Speech: How to Talk Like You Were Born to Rule, Not Drool. Lesson 1. Pronouncing the letter R as softly as a breeze. No tongue fluttering, no tooth grinding, he emphasized. A Habsburg noble doesn't growl like a hound. They pour each syllable like aged wine, you repeated after him. Rain, red, river, roar. No, that sounds like a war trumpet. Again. Relax the jaw, steady the chin. You obeyed. Once, twice. By the fifth try, your face began to cramp. But Ludwig nodded. Better. The chin's not quivering like yesterday. After pronunciation came smiling. Seriously. Here, smiling was an art form. Ludwig handed you a handheld mirror and instructed, Smile 1, with the eyes. No teeth. Smile 2, Lift one corner of the mouth. Smile. 3. Nod gently, exhale through the nose, no visible gums. You tried smile 3 and felt like you were about to sneeze while holding in a cough. Ludwig scribbled, progressing. Not yet natural. Next was the no spittle conversation drill. You were given a thin cloth to place on your chest while he recited the test line. At the wedding feast, we shall toast endless prosperity. He then examined the cloth for moisture. You tried repeating it. At the wedding feast, we shall toast. The cloth came back slightly damp. Ludwig frowned. Lower your tongue. Remember, royal guests don't need spring showers. Then came facial expression exercises. He showed you how to look intrigued without widening your eyes, disagree without furrowing your brow, and receive sad news without dropping your lower lip. You trained all morning. By the end, your head was more tired than your neck. But Ludwig nodded solemnly. Today, the princess improved. At this rate, you'll give a speech at your wedding and no one will need to wipe their face. You stood, bowed, and left the room like a reprogrammed wax figure. On the way back, you practiced simple phrases in your head. I am walking, without tilting my chin. I am thinking, without grinning too wide. I shall speak, like a noblewoman, bone dry. Back in your room, you opened your journal and wrote, Day 9. I learned to control my mouth like a ballerina controls her toes, and discovered, sometimes, silence is the most aristocratic sound of all. That evening, at dinner, you applied the lessons. When a great uncle recounted his boar hunting heroics, you nodded and gave smile too. When a great aunt praised your posture, saying it resembled your grandmother's grandmother, you responded with smile 3. You tilted your head and exhaled softly through your nose when asked about your marriage plans. No one had to wipe their face. After dinner, you sat quietly, sipping chamomile tea, realizing you hadn't just learned how to talk. You'd learned how not to say too much. A rare skill in a palace where everyone seemed to say the same things for generations. And you whispered, perhaps the conversation isn't about expression. It's about survival, in a dialogue that's been echoing for centuries. That morning, you were summoned to the royal council chamber not to discuss matters of state, but to receive the official announcement of your engagement. No surprises, no bursts of emotion. No one shouted, congratulations, or threw petals. Because in your family, an engagement was simply a formality. Confirmation that the bloodlines had been thoroughly checked and weren't too closely entangled. You stepped into the grand hall with its high wooden ceilings and stained glass windows depicting historic weddings between people and their second cousins. Your parents were already seated at one end of the long table. Across from them sat Leopold's parents, your betrothed, whom you'd met just last week. No one exchanged warm glances. Instead, they opened family lineage books and nodded thoughtfully as if negotiating a business merger. You took your seat. Leopold leaned over slightly and whispered, "Hello." You replied, "How are you?" He nodded. "My cousin messaged me yesterday. Turns out we share a great-great-grandparent." You smiled politely. "Maternal or paternal side?" "Both." You both chuckled. Not out of humor, but because there was nothing else to say. After a few minutes spent verifying documents and family seals, the master of ceremony stepped forward and, in a voice as steady as rainfall, declared, "And so the two houses have agreed. The young lady, daughter of Count Albrecht, granddaughter of Lady Hilda, direct descendant of King Charles II, shall marry Leopold, son of Count Franz, bearer of the Tyrolean line and descendant of the Spanish branch." You didn't object. Neither did Leopold. No one expected you to agree verbally. In this room, silence was the highest form of consent. and you were better at silence than anyone else in the last 3 generations. There was no ring exchanged, only a velvet-wrapped scroll listing the 8 converging bloodlines of both families, sealed and tied in ribbon. You held it in your hands like a map into a maze you'd already been wandering since before you could walk. After the ceremony, you and Leopold were left alone in the hanging garden to have a private moment. But instead of exchanging tender words, you sat on a wooden bench, gazing at the pond. Silent. Calm. It was not awkward because both of you seemed to understand. Nothing you said now would change what had already been arranged. Eventually, Leopold spoke. "Do you like sparrows?" You turned, slightly surprised. "They're fine." He nodded. "Me too." A pause. You asked, "Do you have any hobbies?" He thought for a moment. "I like maps. And the history of dynastic marriages." You chuckled softly. "I like quiet." "Good," he said. "I don't talk much." The two of you returned your gaze to the pond. Fish swam in slow circles, much like your relatives chose their spouses. You exhaled, thinking, "We don't love each other, nor do we hate each other. We're just 2 people in a boat set afloat by our great-grandparents. Now we just have to keep paddling. As long as it doesn't tip, we'll be fine." That afternoon, you were taught how to write the official engagement announcement, not for friends, but for distant family branches. They needed time to prepare gifts and seating charts and ensure no one wore the same color as the bride, who might also be their cousin. You copied the template by hand. "I, Princess of the House of Habsburg, descendant of Charles II and Isidora of Tyrol, hereby announce my engagement to Leopold, bearer of 2 of the rarest noble bloodlines in Europe. Our wedding shall be held at Elmsborg Castle during the 2nd lunar week." You folded the letter and sealed it with wax. It felt more like signing a mortgage contract than announcing a marriage. That evening, the castle celebrated with an even quieter dinner than usual. No toasts, no music, just a harp softly strumming in the corner, and the scent of fruit-filled pastries wafting through the hall. You looked across the table at Leopold. He looked back. You both raised your glasses gently. No one said, "Congratulations." Just a quiet glance that said, "We'll go through with this. Not out of love, but because we were raised never to ask why." Back in your room, sitting at the edge of your bed, you opened your journal and wrote in small script. "Today's engagement passed like a breeze that's been charted since my great-grandfather's time." You closed the book, pulled the blanket to your chest, and exhaled, long and slow. The next morning, you woke up later than usual, not because anyone permitted you, but because last night's engagement ceremony had drained you completely, even though you hadn't said a single word, exhausted without speaking. That's the survival art of a Habsburg noble. You stepped into the hallway, still groggy. A maid greeted you with a polite smile and handed you a delicately scented card. "Afternoon tea with Lady Elizabeth, West Conservatory." You blinked. Elizabeth? She'd been your friend since childhood, or more precisely, your 3rd cousin on your mother's side. Part-time confidant, part-time rival in embroidery competitions, music recitals, and the eternal struggle to wear non-matching dresses at formal banquets. You arrived at the conservatory at 3. The afternoon sun filtered through pale pink stained glass, casting floral patterns and soft colors across the stone floor. Elizabeth was already seated, wearing an ivory gown delicately embroidered with irises, the symbolic flower of pure bloodlines. She smiled and waved. "Darling, come sit. I just had the maid prepare Austrian-style chamomile, your favorite." You nodded and sat down. Inside, you felt a strange mix of warmth and caution, like spotting a cat purring just a little too sweetly. "I heard you got engaged to Leopold?" she asked, her voice as light as whipped cream. You nodded. Yes, the ceremony was yesterday. Elizabeth took a sip of tea and smiled. Ah, Leopold. Such a gentleman. Do you remember? I danced my first waltz with him when we were little. You offered a polite smile. Right. I remember. You tripped on your hem, and he nearly fell backward. Exactly. She laughed and looked at you fondly. But he caught me. Such steady hands, truly. You weren't sure how to respond. Inside, a little bell rang. Cousin is testing the waters. Elizabeth continued pouring tea and casually asked, Have you had many long conversations with him yet? He doesn't speak much, but he's so deep. Once, when I told him about the rose bushes in the garden, he stayed silent for 15 minutes. Then finally said, Every rose has thorns. Don't you think that's profound? You nodded, not wanting to disturb the gentle atmosphere, but your thoughts whispered, profound, maybe, or just needs translation. The conversation moved forward at a slow but deliberate pace. Elizabeth never asked directly, never complimented, obviously, but every phrase was a subtle needle threading a silk tension. She was eyeing your fiancé, and strangely, despite having never felt particularly drawn to Leopold, you felt a faint, unexpected tightness inside. Not love. Something closer to instinct. He's my betrothed. I was arranged first. I came before. After tea, you returned to your room with a head slightly spinning. On the way, you thought of those wedding portraits in the grand hall. At least 4 couples who'd married cousins, only for one cousin to marry the other's nephew 10 years later. You mused, perhaps in this palace, no one ever truly belongs to anyone. There are only those who arrive first, and those who are added later. Back in your room, you opened your journal, pen poised, then paused. You asked yourself, if Leopold prefers Elizabeth, how would I feel? Do I even have the personal right to feel hurt? You weren't sure. Here, feelings were things tucked into velvet boxes beneath beds, opened only if they didn't interfere with family charts. That evening at dinner, you sat beside Leopold. Elizabeth sat across from you, her gaze soft but sharp enough to make you chew slower. Leopold asked, How was your day? You smiled lightly. Fine. I had tea with Elizabeth. He nodded, glanced at Elizabeth, and then looked down at his plate, said nothing more. You sipped your water, and realized that sometimes silence is an answer, not to who loves whom, but to who's watching whom. That night, before bed, you wrote a final line in your journal. My cousin is my friend. And my friend is looking at my fiancée like she's choosing the color of a handkerchief she's about to embroider. In this palace, everything can be repeated, even a glance. You put your pen down and sighed, not heavily, not lightly. Just a quiet breath, from someone who knows that personal feelings must always kneel before their name in the family tree. Just as you took your first sip of tea this morning, a maid entered with a face that could not hide its solemnity. Your Highness, your wedding dress has arrived from the archives of Zeewold Castle. You froze. Not out of surprise. Anyone born into this family knows that wedding dresses are not made anew. They are part of the bloodline, the tradition, and, without exaggeration, the diplomatic strategy. The ancestral wedding gown, or as your aunts call it with trembling reverence, the sacred dress, is a greater inheritance than a crown. It has been worn by 7 women before you, each marrying a man of shared blood, leaving behind a tiny stitch, a fresh thread of embroidery, a layer of unseen tears within the seams. The maid opened the large wooden chest and laid the gown across your bed. It weighed nearly as much as a small child. hand-woven in ivory silk now aged to cream, embroidered with family crests in gold and crimson thread, with a collar so high it kissed the chin, a design deemed iconic and unchanged for the last 300 years. You looked at that collar and sighed. The maid whispered, "You may try it on today. Lady Margareta will arrive shortly to assess the fit." Just hearing her name made your neck stiffen, but you nodded. 2 maids helped dress you. Each layer was smoothed with reverence, and every fold of lace seemed to whisper, "You are not the first. You will not be the last." The dress fit eerily well, as if it had always belonged to you, as if each generation had left its shape in the fabric, their presence pressed into every seam. And the collar? It's still as high as when it was first designed, covering nearly half your face. When you tried to smile, your chin was pushed back in, a silent reminder. Here, no one smiles too broadly. Lady Margareta entered, clutching a leather notebook and a wooden measuring stick. She circled you once and nodded. "Excellent. The gown still carries the aura." You asked gently, "Lady Margareta, do you think we might lower the collar slightly? For comfort?" She turned to you as if you had just suggested relocating the empire's capital. "Lower the collar?" She enunciated each word. "My dear, do you know how many generations have worn this dress? Each one preserved this collar like a vow. If you alter it, how will your descendants recognize the standard?" You nodded, bowed slightly, and felt as though you were wearing armor made of silk. The entire day was spent learning how to move in the gown. Every step is a balancing act between tradition and the desire to breathe. You tried walking faster, corrected. I tried turning too sharply, corrected. Eventually, you learned to glide like a swan with bound feet, graceful, elegant, and breathless. By late afternoon, you were allowed to rest. A maid brought an old book, a record of notes written by the 7 women who had worn the gown before you. Each had written one sentence in a tiny pocket hidden beneath the dress. You opened it and read. The first wrote, "I married my cousin, but the dress was so beautiful, I forgot everything else." The third wrote, "The collar is too high, but better to suffocate than be deemed unrefined." The most recent, 32 years ago, wrote, "May my daughter or niece or someone with this same chin wear it next, and please, don't change the collar." You smiled to yourself, unsure whether you were truly amused or just uncertain how else to feel. You returned to your room, sat before the mirror, and stared at yourself in the ancestral wedding gown. Part of you felt honored. Part of you felt like you'd stepped into a beautifully carved box, without a lid. You opened your journal and wrote, "I just tried on my wedding dress. I'm the 8th to wear it." Each one left something behind in the fabric, and maybe in the chin. Then you closed your eyes and exhaled slowly. Inside, a quiet, unshakable question echoed. If we all wear the same dress, does anyone truly live a life of their own? Just as you finished tying the ribbon on your silk house dress that morning, a maid burst in with a face stretched tight as harp strings, clutching a stack of papers thick enough to be mistaken for a royal chronicle. "Your Highness," she said, "the wedding guest list has been finalized. Lady Margareta requests your review." You sat down, bracing yourself as if about to open a 3,000-line epic poem. This stack wasn't just a guest list. It was a camouflaged family tree, unrolled and repurposed into a wedding banquet. The first sheet was a seating chart. You noticed immediately. It wasn't arranged by social rank or emotional closeness, but by genetic proximity. At the main table, besides you and Leopold, would be both sets of parents, the pillars of this historic genetic merger. Your paternal grandmother, who once married her cousin. Your second cousin, who was nearly engaged to Leopold as a child, missed eligibility by 1 year. The side tables, that's where things got creative. You read on. Table 2, those who were almost brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law. Table 3, maternal relatives who switched branches due to political shifts. Table 4, Tyrol blood with a hint of Lorraine. Table 5, unverified, has the chin, but source unknown. You paused at table 9. Descendants of the couple who wore the ancestral gown but bore no children, attending out of courtesy. You set the paper down. It felt like reading a choreographed opera in the language of genetic inheritance. In the section titled Special Considerations, you found Prince Enrique's family, not to be seated near Lady Isadora due to unresolved tensions dating back to the 1652 wedding. Lady Teresa not invited, no longer bears family genes after remarrying outside the bloodline. You blinked, not out of surprise, but fatigue. The list was longer than the libretto of an opera where you weren't even the lead. A maid poured you tea. You leaned back and asked softly, "How many of these guests actually have no blood ties to me?" She smiled gently. "Perhaps the harpist in the corner, though. He's the godson of your distant great-aunt." You sighed and kept reading. On the back page, post-ceremony group portrait plan. A note in red ink read, Group 1, descendants of Ancestress Isadora, stand to the left. Group 2, Spanish Lorraine branch, stand to the right. Mixed or undetermined lineage, stand in the center, slightly bowed. You sat there, chin propped on the very chin of your Habsburg lineage, and realized that this wedding was no longer a personal event. It was a full-scale genetic exhibition, a festival for bloodlines. That afternoon, you walked into the grand hall, being prepped for the ceremony. Servants bustled about, tying flowers to columns and draping silk over rows of seats. But what caught your eye was the massive wall on the right, a handcrafted reproduction of the family tree stretched from ceiling to floor, printed on fine silk. Beneath the banner, in honor of the bloodline, every name, every branching lineage, and every marital symbol was marked in silver thread. The golden thread connecting you and Leopold glowed like a main artery on a map toward no return. A servant whispered, "Each guest will receive a booklet with a mini version of the tree to help them identify who they're sitting beside." You laughed, picturing an old baron munching cake while flipping through pages to see if the woman beside him was his sister-in-law's great-granddaughter. Back in your room, you opened your journal and wrote, "My wedding will host 247 guests. 219 are blood relatives at varying levels of proximity. The remaining guest is a harpist. He deserves a statue for surviving a wedding without sharing a single chromosome." That night, you sat by the window. A gentle wind rustled the curtains. From afar, you could hear the orchestra rehearsing softly, and you thought, "Tomorrow, I'll marry someone familiar down to the blood. I'll wear a dress worn by 7 women before me, and I'll enter a hall where anyone could guess my blood type, just by looking at my chin." You exhaled. Not sad, not happy, just accepting. The kind of acceptance in your family is considered a form of nobility. Just as you finished your morning tea, a knock came at the door, not hurried, but unmistakably firm. A maid bowed and handed you a card printed on stiff, gold-embossed paper. Final wedding rehearsal. Time, 9 a.m. Location, Royal Grand Hall. Note, maintain precise traditional pacing. You sighed and set your teacup down. Traditional pacing didn't refer to a heartbeat. It meant a specific cadence of steps, codified generations ago after too many near-disastrous gown entanglements. It had since become a kind of inherited ritual. You were escorted to the grand hall, every stone tile seemingly infused with the echoes of weddings past. White flowers everywhere, silver ribbons, and servants scuttling backward like they feared touching anything that hadn't yet been genealogy approved. At the center stood the rehearsal coordinator, Lady Matilda, vice mistress of ceremony. Hair pinned high, holding a silver measuring stick. She did not smile. She barely blinked. "Your Highness, to position please," she said. "We begin at the 16th step, precisely as the procession music enters the tri-blood harmony refrain." You didn't ask questions. You knew. In moments like this, doubt was nearly as grave as being engaged to a stranger. You stepped forward. 2 attendants lifted your gown's train so you wouldn't trip before the ceremony began. Lady Matilda snapped her fingers. The music started. A stately symphony composed in the 15th century for the House of Habsburg, entitled "The Bloodline Eternal, a Triumphal Chorus." You took one step, then another. The music beat slow and steady, not fast, not dragging, just the sort of rhythm that would lull any under-caffeinated guest into a nap halfway through your wedding. Suddenly Matilda hissed, like winter winds slicing through the stone. Step 11 was off axis, back, spine not aligned with the posture of Ancestress Maria. You turned and exhaled. The 3rd time that morning you'd been compared to Maria, famed for never bowing, even when stepping over mousetraps. You restarted, followed the floor markers. Each step had to land on a tile etched with a silver rose, your family's symbol of marital steadfastness. Legend had it, if a bride stepped off the roses, her children would be born with off-centered chins. You weren't about to test that theory. Next came greeting the families, where you had to incline exactly 17 degrees, bow low enough for your forehead to be visible, but not so low your bangs hid your heritage. Your gaze had to flick across the guests as though you'd memorized everyone's lineage since age 3. "Don't linger on anyone from branch line 3, Matilda warned. "It suggests romantic interest." You nodded, barely. Your jaw was sore, but surrendering wasn't in your bloodline. Then came the hand-holding segment. Leopold entered Cape Crisp, his smile soft and rehearsed over 3 days. You stood opposite him. Per protocol, your hand rested in his for exactly 7 seconds. Matilda counted aloud. 1, 2, eye contact, 3, no head tilt, 4, 5, stillness, 6, 7, release. You both withdrew your hands and turned outward to bow to your ancestors. It is a graceful move, with no room left for personal emotion. You glanced at him and whispered, "You all right?" Leopold nodded. "You?" "Chin's a bit numb," you replied. He smiled faintly. "We're alike, then." The rehearsal ended after 2 hours. You returned to your room with shaky legs but a strangely clear head. You had just completed what many called a wedding without vows. You sat, opened your notebook, and wrote, "Today I learned how to walk like my foremothers, bow like my great-grandmother, smile like my cousin, and hold a hand like sealing a contract." Nothing felt wrong. Just a little like puppetry. You closed the notebook and looked into the mirror. Everything was in place. The dress, the collar, your posture. Yet your eyes held something both startled and steady, as if asking yourself, can love really slip between footsteps laid out centuries in advance? And you whispered, if it can, then let it begin with one step off the silver rose. You awakened to the sound of church bells ringing long and low, and the overwhelming scent of orange blossoms filling the room. A maid draws back the curtains and softly says, "Your Highness, today is the great day, when bloodline and tradition shall unite beneath the sacred dome." You sit up, unhurried. Something in you drifts like incense. Not sadness, not joy, just reality. The ancestral wedding gown is already hung beside your bed. Still, the same heavy ivory fabric, the same towering collar like a declaration, the same golden embroidery threaded with the hopes of 7 women before you. The maids help dress you, one layer at a time, a sacred ritual, heavy in both symbolism and, quite literally, weight. You're adorned with traditional face powder, made from crushed lavender pollen and a touch of ivory dust. Your hair is swept up high and pinned with silver combs engraved with your family's crest. Everything is flawless, not by your feelings, but according to the ceremonial manual that reads longer than a liturgy. Below the castle, wooden wheels clatter against stone. The guests have arrived. Dressed in ceremonial attire, they bring engraved invitations, miniature family trees, and, if important enough, badges indicating their exact branch of the bloodline. You're led to a waiting room near the chapel, hidden behind thick curtains to keep the bride unseen by the groom. Though truthfully, you've met Leopold far too many times in genealogical charts already. Seeing him in person now is more of a confirmation that his lineage followed the correct turn. Lady Margareta enters and adjusts your collar one final time. She whispers like a priestess, "You'll do well, dear. Because today, you carry not just your name, but 800 years of family calculation." You offer smile number 3, the kind that reveals no teeth. The music begins. A royal composition, written especially for weddings like yours, modestly titled, "The Harmonious Assembly of Pure Lineage." You step out, escorted by your father, the same man who married your mother in this gown on this stone path. The guests all rise, but no one gasps, no one weeps. Instead, heads nod gently as though confirming the fulfillment of an ancient contract. You glance around. The feast is already laid out. Banners embroidered with your crest stretch from the altar to the cake table. The cake itself is a 3-tiered replica from the reign of King Charles II, filled with almonds and dried figs, structured for both longevity and lineage. You approach Leopold. He stands tall, hands gently over his heart, just like they taught in wedding posture class number. 2 inches. You both nod. No words are needed. The script was written generations ago. The priest opens the holy book. He doesn't ask, "Do you take this man?" Instead he reads, "We gather to witness the union of 2 noble bloodlines, a continuation of heritage proudly chosen, preserved, and extended through the will of our ancestors." You listen, but your mind drifts beyond the chapel walls. You wonder, has anyone ever objected to one of these ceremonies? Then answer yourself. If they had, they're probably no longer included in the family archives. The ceremony concludes. You and Leopold sign the marital accord. Your hand trembles slightly. They'll say it's due to sacred emotion. You're handed a silk handkerchief and walk through an arch of flowers. The guests toss not petals, but slips of genealogical excerpts printed on fine paper, fluttering through the air like a declaration. You married this man because his great-grandfather once shared a grandmother with your aunt's sister-in-law. The banquet begins. Every guest is given a handbook, not of the food, but of the surrounding bloodlines. There's even a game. Find the person with your matching forehead slope in under 3 minutes. You sit in the center of it all, wearing the ancestral gown, beside a husband you don't dislike, but don't yet love. You raise your glass of grape wine and smile politely. Around you, 200 faces mirror your chin length, eye spacing, and voice timbre refined through inheritance. In your mind, you pen a journal entry. Today I married a man. Not because I wished it, but because everyone wished my blood would stay intact. I am the heir of selection, not the kind shaped by evolution, but by preservation. You close your eyes and smile softly, not with joy or regret. Because deep down, you know, in this castle, a wedding isn't where love blooms. It's the day the family tree is pruned, and one more branch has been added to the right place. As the final harp notes fade and the guests retreat to their private quarters, you're led to the castle's third floor, to the bridal suite that had been prepared long before you were even born. The room is located in the southeast wing and bears a traditional name, the Chamber of Bloodline Continuation, not the Room of Love. The name alone makes its purpose clear. This is where generations of royalty have fulfilled their duty to the lineage. The door is opened with a silver key engraved with 2 entwined serpents, a symbol of complete genes. You step inside, and every sense immediately registers. This room was not designed to be romantic, but solemn. Thick oak bed frame, beige sheets threaded with gold, and, no joke, a condensed family tree framed above the headboard, as if to remind you that at least a dozen names on it gave up their lives so you could be here. Leopold enters after you, robe flowing, gaze calm, as though walking into a private summit with both sides of the family. He sits beside a table where a thin leather folder already awaits. You raise an eyebrow. He says softly, almost apologetically, "The royal physician left us the gene dossier, so we're aware of our safe zones for reproduction." You walk over and glance down. A soft watercolor diagram on the page shows 2 genomes, yours in blue and his in pale yellow. In the center, a green overlap is labeled match rate 81%. Reproduction permitted under monitored conditions. Avoid raw almonds during the first month. You look at him, unsure whether to laugh or escape onto the balcony. But Leopold merely shrugs. "I'm not against this. I just think, if we must do this, we might as well do it. Kindly." You nod. Not because you're convinced, but because there's nothing left to protest. You both change into nightwear, silk garments embroidered with the crests of both families, forming a 6-petal rose when standing side by side. Then you sit on the bed. Tension? Not quite. But it's undoubtedly not passion either. Leopold speaks first, softly. "Do you remember the first time we talked? At the tea room. You asked if I like sparrows." He smiles faintly. "And you said, 'They're fine.'" You both chuckle, a quiet moment of comfort. You exhale. "I don't know what will happen after tonight. But if everything we've done is meant to preserve the gene pool, then maybe, even if we don't love each other, we're still protecting something bigger." He nods, then stands suddenly, walking to a small bookshelf near the bed. "I found this earlier today. It was already here." He pulls down a thin, weathered book. You open it. It's a journal, written by a woman named Isadora, the 4th woman to wear your wedding gown. She had written, "I used to think love came before marriage, but perhaps in this family, love comes after, or arrives differently, like understanding, like sitting beside someone without needing to speak." You finish reading, close the book gently, and sit still. That night, you and Leopold lie beneath the family tree carved into the wall above your heads. No one forces anything. No rush. Just 2 young people, no longer strangers, no longer entirely alone. You pull the blanket up to your chest and whisper, "Tomorrow, They'll expect us to produce more chins. He smiles lightly. And we'll do it. Slowly. Like genes do. Quietly. You close your eyes. Outside, the castle sinks into silence. A breeze flows through the open window, rustling the embroidered curtains with the family crest. And in that gentle darkness, you're not thinking about legacy or duty. You're only thinking about the feeling of your back against the linen and someone beside you, who asks for nothing more than presence. You whisper, soft as breath. If love in this palace doesn't come from the heart, may it at least come from gentleness. You wake to birds singing in the garden and soft golden sunlight filtering through the curtains. No one knocks, no one calls your name, no bells, no reminders from Lady Margareta. Just you, the large bed, and a sweet stillness after a night that you wouldn't quite call sweet, but definitely relieving. Leopold is still asleep, his breath steady like a ticking clock. You quietly slip out of bed, wrap yourself in a soft silk robe, and step to the window. In the courtyard below, a flock of sparrows hops around the fountain. You remember Leopold's first question about sparrows, and something inside you softens. Before you can turn back, there's a knock at the door, light but firm. A servant bows and hands you a piece of thick paper sealed in red wax along with a quill. Your Highness, the Family Health Council requests confirmation that the wedding night proceeded successfully for genealogical monitoring purposes. You're not shocked. You don't even laugh. You simply nod, take the paper, and open it. The title reads, Royal Copulation Confirmation, Discrete Evaluation Form, Form G.02. Below are the fields to fill in. 1. Morning physical state. Well, slight fatigue, in need of more tea. 2. Harmonious indicators between partners. Shared eye contact. Mutual agreement on room temperature. 3. Lineage continuation potential. Positive. Requires observation. Submit hair sample for further testing. You sit at the writing desk, staring at the quill like a ceremonial sword. Then you check, well, shared eye contact, and positive. After all, you think, if love in this world can begin with silent nods, then maybe 3 ticks on a form is also a kind of acknowledgement. You hand the form back to the servant. She bows and disappears behind the door like a whisper of steam. Back in the room, Leopold is awake, eyes absent-mindedly fixed on the ceiling. You sit beside him on the bed and ask, did they make you sign one too? He nods and holds up his copy. You both glance at each other and smile. Not broadly, but enough to feel that a shared smirk might be the first step toward closeness in a marriage governed by genetics and charts. You have breakfast in your room. Dark rye bread, goat cheese, and rose tea. On the tray is a small note. The Family Council requests your presence for an urgent meeting. Topic: post-wedding assessment and heir production timeline. You chew your bread slowly and exhale. After breakfast, you wear a simple formal gown and head to the northern meeting room. Lady Margareta, Count Franz, your mother, and your father-in-law are all present. A miniature model of the family tree is on the table, made of carved wooden blocks. Lady Margareta opens the meeting. We are pleased the wedding proceeded perfectly, but the most important matter is still ahead, securing the next generation. You nod, not out of agreement. However, in this place, nodding is the baseline requirement for survival. A clerk places a thick book on the table. The Egg Schedule, Ancestral Ovulation Calendar of the House of Habsburg, updated edition. You glance at Leopold. His face remains calm. You turn back to the council and ask, so, what's the proposed timeline? Count Franz responds, as tradition dictates. First year, a child must be produced. Gender isn't critical, but the lineage must be unmistakable. We'll assign regular physicians, and of course, weekly reports. You nod. What else can you do? After the meeting, you return to your room and open your journal. You write, first day after marriage. I signed a form stating I don't dislike my husband. The family rejoiced. They saw it as a sign of genetic compatibility. I see it as the beginning of a life programmed entirely by ancestry. You close the book, stand up, and leave the balcony. The sky is cloudy, but still bright. You hear Leopold speaking with a servant about where to place a new bookshelf. And you think, maybe love, if it comes, will arrive in the smallest of things. Like sharing the same taste in pastries or hating the same curtains. Or agreeing that a post-coital form is a bit much. You sit down and take a deep breath. If this is day 1 of marriage, then I really hope day 2 doesn't involve a saliva test. The next morning, you're awakened by a silver tray of tea and a familiar announcement, so familiar that you no longer find it surprising. Your Highness, the escort party is ready. Today is the departure for your royal honeymoon. You sit up, one eyebrow raised. Just the two of us? The maid smiles politely, though her eyes can't quite hide a trace of sympathy. No, Your Highness. A few family members will accompany you, per tradition. A total of 43, including your husband's relatives, the maternal branch, the uncles, and several aunts who have valuable honeymoon experience to share. You drop your head into the pillow. 30 minutes later, you're sitting in a gilded carriage, gently rocking over cobbled roads. Beside you is Leopold, quiet as always. But this time, his eyes carry a flicker of mutual resignation. Behind you are 2 more carriages, one carrying his great aunt, who's had 3 honeymoons and insists on bringing her own tea set. The other packed with 8 cousins, each carrying a suitcase filled with family tree replicas. You turn to Leopold and whisper, "Feeling relaxed?" He exhales, as relaxed as one can be while honeymooning with someone who once midwifed my father. You chuckle softly, a tired laugh, but one of surrender. The royal retreat is calm and scenic in the Tyrolean mountains, with burbling waterfalls and evergreen forests. It would be idyllic if you ever had a moment of peace. From the moment you arrive, you're surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins, all eager to share wisdom or observe how well you two mesh. The first meal begins with a toast from the family elder. Let us raise our glasses, not only to the couple's happiness, but to the successful convergence of their genes. Everyone cheers to the union and clinks their glasses of wine as dry as Lady Margaretta's commentary on your choice of nightgown. In the afternoon, you're invited to the traditional walk, a formal lap around the lake in solemn silence. Everyone holds hands, not for affection, but to ensure perfectly synchronized posture, as done in generations past. You and Leopold walk in the middle. Ahead, one of his cousins murmurs to an aunt, "I think the princess's chin is still a little soft. Hopefully, our side's genes will correct that in the next generation." You grip Leopold's hand. He whispers back, "Don't worry. I inherited the strongest chin on my father's side. They'll be pleased." That evening, you're ushered into the family game. Guess the ancestor. Everyone is handed an old portrait and must match it to a family branch. The winner gets the first pick of dessert. You lose 3 times in a row, because everyone shares the same nose and hairstyle. Afterward comes story hour, where each relative shares a post-wedding anecdote to inspire the new generation. One elderly aunt recalls her honeymoon in this town, admitting she couldn't recognize her husband for 3 days because he looked too much like her cousin. You smile and nod, that familiar nod when you're unsure whether to be moved or mildly alarmed. At night, you and Leopold return to your room. Finally, just the two of you. You sit by the bed, pour tea, and glance at him. "Isn't it weird," you ask, "that our honeymoon includes dozens of people who share at least 10% of our DNA?" He nods. "Yes, but at least they're not in the bed with us." You laugh softly. Both of you fall silent for a moment. Then he asks, "If you could choose again, would you honeymoon somewhere else?" You shrug. "Maybe. By the sea. Just wind. No one asking about my nasal structure or forehead curve." He nods. "We'll go. One day. But first, we survive the Genetics Council retreat." You lie down, eyes closed. Outside, the giggles of his cousins drift through the air like a genetic symphony. You open your journal and write your final line of the day. "Today was the first day of our honeymoon. I laughed 8 times, sighed 12, and was reminded of my noble bloodline. 25 times. Love may not have taken root, but patience seems to have found fertile ground." You close the book, pull the blanket up your chest, and exhale slowly. The next morning, you wake up in the honeymoon suite, where sunlight streams through lace curtains embroidered with your husband's family crest. On the table, rather than fresh flowers or postcards, is a sealed letter stamped in red wax, bearing the insignia of your new in-laws. You open it. Inside is a handwritten letter, a neat, delicate script, as if the writer were transcribing scripture rather than simply writing a note. The title reads, "A Gentle Guide for Our Dear Daughter-in-Law. Noble Reproduction Etiquette." You exhale slowly, then begin to read. "My dear, I trust you had a fulfilling honeymoon with Leopold, at least in symbolic terms. Now, it is time to embark on the most sacred journey for any woman in our lineage, ensuring the continuation of our noble bloodline. Please don't worry. We've done this for centuries, and if all the aunts, mothers, and grandmothers in this family have managed, you will too. Below are a few gentle guidelines to help you produce a correctly distinguished heir." You pause and pour yourself a cup of tea, unsure whether to smile or summon the court physician for emotional support. 1. The firstborn should ideally arrive in spring. Statistics show that 73% of our kings born in April have well-balanced jawlines and exceptional diplomatic skills. If the child is born in autumn by chance, that's acceptable, though you'll need a special diet to balance out their temperamental disposition. You blink. Leopold walks into the room, sees the letter in your hand, and asks, "Who's it from?" You hold it up. "Your mother. About reproduction." He nods, unbothered. "She's very organized. Once made a spreadsheet to track the eye colors of third cousins." You keep reading. 2. Avoid white beans in the first trimester. They may blur forehead gene clarity. Instead, focus on 3-year aged hard cheeses and pomegranates to fortify jaw and temple definition. You think about the white bean porridge you almost ordered for breakfast and quietly change your mind. 3. During pregnancy, regularly gaze at portraits of ancestors. Modern science hasn't confirmed this, but frequent exposure revives the memory of noble gene formation. You glance up at the massive portrait of Leopold's great-grandfather above the bed, the one with a jaw sharp enough to split logs. You think, maybe our child should look at a different painting. You're about to fold the letter when you notice the postscript. P.S. If possible, place your hand on your stomach each morning and whisper the names of your maternal ancestors, 3 generations back. That's how Leopold's grandmother did it. And as you can see, Leopold turned out splendidly. You set the letter down and glance at Leopold, now fumbling with his cravat for the afternoon's post-marriage committee tea. You ask softly, "Do you ever feel pressured?" He thinks for a moment. Not really, just like science, but from another century. Both of you laugh. That afternoon, you're invited to the historical reproduction roundtable with the women of your husband's lineage. 12 aunts gather in a circle, each holding a family birth journal. One share. I had all 3 of mine during full moons, best for yin-yang harmony. First looked like his father, second like his grandfather, and the third like my husband's biological mother. You smile politely, clutching your teacup like the only source of warmth in the room not genetically inherited. Later, back in your suite, you open your journal and write, "Today I learned that giving birth in this family is not just a duty. It's a ritual, a calculation, an exam. And it seems the grade is based less on health and more on jawline precision and eyelash length." You close the journal and lie on the bed, the letter still in your hand. You don't feel angry or sad, just quietly aware that you live in a world where emotions are graphed and faith is tied to chromosomes. You think to yourself, if my future child ends up looking just like me, they'll probably ask, "Whose gene gave you those slightly rounded eyebrows?" You smile faintly, then drift into a gentle nap as the evening breeze brushes past the pines outside, like a lullaby for a young mother preparing to step into a world where motherhood comes with a family tree chart. That afternoon, after a quiet tea by the window and a freshly penned journal entry, you receive a formal invitation, delivered in a cream-colored silk envelope embossed in gold with the words, "You are cordially invited to the fertility celebration banquet, hosted by the Maternal Aunt Council." You read it 3 times. I still can't quite believe you've just been invited to a party celebrating your uterus. But you nod anyway. Declining a Maternal Aunt Council invite is equivalent to being cut from the inheritance list for the region's most prized hand-embroidered handkerchief. You choose a pale lavender silk dress, appropriate for joyful anticipation, yet maintaining restraint, as Lady Margareta would say. Leopold walks you to the door and whispers, "They once invited me to a similar banquet. For testicular readiness. You're not alone." You arrive at the banquet hall, a room glowing with candlelight, white lace tablecloths, and red roses. Each chair is labeled not with names, but with genealogical branch crests. No one is dressed casually. Every aunt, cousin, and great-niece is in full formal wear as if attending a royal ball. But instead of dance gossip or tea menus, the topic is your uterus. You sit between Aunt Felicia and Great-Aunt Georgina, who immediately lean in, eyes gleaming like reporters chasing a scandal. "So, my dear, any fluttering yet? The ovaries stirring at all?" You haven't even opened your mouth when Felicia adds, "When I was your age, my womb ran like a Swiss clock. Didn't need doctors, just had to sniff the tea to know I was due." You nod and take a huge sip of water. The evening's host, your husband's maternal grandmother, taps her wine glass and delivers the opening toast. "We gather here to celebrate genetic harmony and to pray that the young lady's womb thrives by ancestral expectations. Please raise your glasses to thick endometrium and plump, cooperative eggs. You do your best not to spit out your drink." Everyone toasts with sparkling eyes. One great-aunt even pulls out a wax uterus model from her purse and places it beside her napkin for reference. The meal begins with an appetizer called genetic eggs, hard-boiled, served with herbs from the matriarch's garden, believed to stimulate forehead growth in future generations. The entree? Endometrial layer cake, 3 tiers of almond flour sponge, spiraled to represent the menstrual cycle. Each slice is examined approvingly, thick, soft, with good elasticity, like the ideal uterus. You eat each bite like you're at a historical gynecology seminar. Halfway through, The game Predict the Future Baby Traits begins. Everyone receives a card and must guess 1. Length of the right toe 2. Chin angle degree 3. Forehead to cheekbone ratio 4. Likelihood of left-handedness. You glance at the card, then at the ants excitedly sketching gene charts. You think to yourself, if this baby doesn't meet these artistic genetic standards, they'll probably request a paternity test. The dessert is rose blossom gelato sprinkled with orchid seed, which is great for pelvic alignment. Then begins the story circle. Each ant shares their childbirth memories like a chaotic reproductive podcast. I had my first during a thunderstorm and still kept my chin shape. I gave birth mid-harpsichord lesson. The baby had perfect pitch. You smile, unsure whether to admire them or quietly exit. At the end, you're gifted a silk-bound notebook titled Uterus Journey, Track and Cherish. Inside are pages to record, dates, flutter feelings, and how many sighs you let out each time someone asks, "Any baby news yet?" Back in your room, notebook in hand, your head still spinning from layer cake uterus imagery. You find Leopold reading. He looks up. "You okay?" You sit beside him, sighing. "They know more about my body than I do." He nods. "They once threatened to examine my testicles using herbal tea." You both laugh, tired, soft, but allies. You open your journal and write, "Today, I attended a fertility banquet. There were flowers, cake, and even a wax uterus model. No one asked what I wanted, just whether the baby would resemble great-grandfather. But the dessert was good." You close the journal, switch off the light, and whisper, "If someone asks about my eggs tomorrow, I'll just say, let them hatch in peace." The next morning, the door swings open as you stretch your legs and let out a deep breath after your first dreamless night's sleep. 3 women in embroidered royal robes enter the room. No knocking, no warning, no hesitation. You sit up, dazed. Leopold is still asleep, face buried in the pillow like he's trying to hide from duty. You sit up, trying your best to stay polite. "Ladies," you begin gently, "I don't believe I've produced any lineage in my sleep just yet. Might we wait until I'm actually pregnant before adjusting my pillow to favor a bloodline?" Bernadette pauses, then nods in understanding. "Yes. But remember, early habit shapes future alignment. We wouldn't want a child to drift from their branch." You're not sure what drift from the branch means, but you're certain you don't want that label attached to either you or your child. Before leaving, they present you with a gift, the Hereditary Guidance Pillow, 4 Seasons Edition. Hand-embroidered, it includes a miniature family tree printed on the inside lining. You can adjust the height by adding or removing silk layers, depending on which bloodline you want to prioritize during sleep. You hold the pillow, unsure whether to be touched, or call for the royal physician. Over a light meal, you tell Leopold about the morning that afternoon. He chooses bread and nods. "They once measured my back, said I slanted left, worried the child might sit crooked on the throne." You stare. Then both of you laugh. Not because it's funny, but because you're past the point of disbelief. Back in your room, you open your journal and write, "Today, they measured my sleeping position like a fortress coordinate. They say my head tilts 12 degrees. I didn't argue. I just thought, maybe sleep should be the one place in this castle where I'm not being genetically adjusted." You close the journal, lie down, and hug the gene alignment pillow. Staring up at the ceiling, you whisper, "I'll tilt left, tilt right. Heck, I'll tilt the whole blanket. As long as I can sleep without being tracked by ancestry charts." That night, you drift off to sleep in the embrace of your hereditary alignment pillow under the dim glow of a scented candle made from specially processed sheep tallow, vanilla, pine wood, and the subtle aroma of genetic pressure. Sleep comes slowly, but when it arrives, it brings something you've never dreamed of before. You find yourself in a round room, the walls covered with portraits of ancestors. Not paintings, but living, moving faces. All of them are watching you. You take a step, and each step feels like a generation. The first face stares, square jaw, high forehead, thick brows. The second is a straight nose, tight lips, and curly hair. The third, your husband's grandmother, is still alive in real life. But in this dream, she's judging. They all speak in the exact phrase, in a blend of Latin and Old German. Bear it, but don't warp the chin. You step back and bump into a miniature statue. A cradle of oak appears. Inside, a sleeping baby, eyes closed, porcelain skin, and a face made of 7 others, pieced together like a puzzle. The jaw is from a great-grandfather, the nose from a third cousin, the hair, untraceable, but not yours. You lean over. The child opens its eyes. And then, in your head, the voice of Lady Margareta echoes. If it resembles no one, it resembles a flaw. You jolt awake. It's still dark. Leopold sleeps soundly beside you. You sit up and open your journal, hands trembling. I dreamt of my child, but it wasn't mine. It was a product of the Genetics Council. You breathe deep. For the first time, you feel a vague fear, not of duty, but of whether your child will be allowed to have a face. You share the dream with Leopold over toast and strawberry jam at breakfast. He listens in silence, then says, I once dreamt our baby was born wearing a red cloak and greeted me with Hail, House of Habsburg. You both laugh, but there's a trace of defeat in the sound. Later, you walk in the garden trying to shake off the dream, but everything reminds you. The sparrows chirp, and it sounds suspiciously like Jean. A leaf twirls down like an ancestral DNA report from heaven. You sit on a stone bench, gazing up at the sky, and you realize you've been so conditioned to expect this child to be a perfect replica that your mind has started assembling it, even before your body has. You remember the wedding blessings. May the child have ears like his father's side. Let the cheeks be round like great granny's. Black eyes, high forehead, broad shoulders. All 3? That's a miracle. No one asked what you wanted. No one asked if you were afraid. That afternoon, you decide to write a letter. Not to send, just for yourself and for your unborn child. Dear child, I don't know who you'll resemble. Maybe you'll have a chin from someone who lived 300 years ago. Maybe you'll be compared to someone I've never met. But I hope that if there's anything truly yours, you won't be afraid of it. I'll protect that part like it's the rarest treasure. I can't promise to defy the family tree, but I can promise to let you be yourself, even just a little. Love, Mom. You fold the letter and place it gently inside your journal, and for the first time, you feel a little lighter. That night, you dream again. But this time, the child in the cradle has no face yet. Soft, undefined. And instead of ancestral whispers, you hear only a quiet breath, your own. You wake up smiling. Not because you know how it'll all turn out, but because, at least this time, your dream wasn't a backup copy of a genealogy chart. You lie back down and whisper, if my child is born not looking like anyone else, then maybe they just look like themselves. The next morning, as you sipped chamomile tea by the window, a servant entered carrying a thick dossier bound with a red ribbon and embossed with your husband's family crest in gold. She bowed and said, in a tone that felt more ceremonial than casual, Your Highness, it is time to begin the naming process. You nearly dropped your teacup. For whom? You asked, watching the steam curl from your drink. For your firstborn, she replied evenly. Tradition requires the process to begin no later than 9 months before birth, to avoid conflicts with any ancestors from the last 7 generations, and to ensure the embroidery of the monogrammed pillow is ready before labor. You gently set down your teacup and open the dossier. The first page read, in regal typeface, "Approved royal lineage names, official registry." Beneath it lay an alphabetized sea of Latin-rooted names. 1. Anastasius, used 7 times. 2. Beatrix, used 12 times, including Beatrix the 5, the one who held the mace. 3. Constance, used 4 times but banned due to a spilled tea scandal in 1611. 4. Dorothea, pre-embroidered handkerchiefs available. 5. Euphemia, used 2 times but discouraged due to pronunciation challenges when drowsy. By page 3, your eyes were blurring. Over 90% of names came annotated. Used in the 17th century. Carries foundational virtue. Tied to the maternal cheekbone line. Or worse, do not use if born in November. Overlaps with the name of one who married her cousin and sparked a minor succession war. Leopold walked in just as you were scribbling stars next to the name Felix. Short, gentle, and charming. He glanced over and chuckled softly. "You haven't seen the feedback stage yet, have you?" You blinked. Feedback? Moments later, a second servant entered with a stack of printed response forms, already filled in by 10 extended family members, from great-grandmothers to cloistered cousins. Each proposed name had been rated under categories like 1. Pleasant emotional association. 2. Risk of repetition. 3. Mild offense. Potential. 4. Name previously associated with questionable conduct. You entered Felix for review. Leopold's great-aunt checked. Suggests lax morals. His uncle crossed it out entirely. Incompatible with medieval jawlines. Only a distant cousin wrote, "Adorable. For a dog." You rubbed your temples. Leopold covered his mouth, trying not to laugh. Later you were summoned to the name sentiment chamber, where ladies of the house offered live commentary on your preferred selections. One aunt initially approved of Isadora, but then backtracked. "Ah, no. Isadora eloped with an Italian poet once. Tradition forbids." You suggested Lucian. The room gasped. "Lucian," Leopold's grandmother cried. "That was the man who lost a priceless bottle of wine in 1653. Absolutely not. Never again." By the end of the day, your original list of 15 had been whittled down to 2 names deemed conditionally acceptable. One was Theodora VI, and the other was Gottfried, but only if the child has naturally aligned teeth. That night, you returned to your room, opened your journal, and wrote, "Today, I learned that choosing a name isn't about beauty. It's about precedent. Every name is a badge for someone else's shadow." Later, as you and Leopold sat beneath candlelight, rereading the shortlist, he asked gently, "What name would you choose?" "Something not on the list," you said, "though I'm not sure I'm allowed." He took your hand and whispered, "If it's our child, then the name should start with us." You nodded, and a quiet calm settled over you. You picked up a fresh sheet of paper, and this time wrote Felix in gold ink. You underlined it, twice, and you smiled. "My love," you whispered to the future, "whatever name you carry, I just hope it does not make you feel like a relic of a family archive." Just as you finished half a slice of cherry jam toast that morning, a servant arrived carrying a single sheet of parchment. It's not a cycle calendar, not a genealogical chart, but a fetal portrait schedule. You stared at the paper, tilting your head as if unsure whether this was a joke or the next step in your increasingly surreal royal life. Today's date was marked in red ink next to a handwritten note. Initial sketch session. Offspring of Princess and Prince Leopold. Location, West Drawing Room. Time, 10 a.m. You looked up and asked, "Am I pregnant?" The girl blushed. "Not officially, Your Highness. But tradition requires a fetal portrait to be prepared in advance, in case the joyful news arrives suddenly. We must avoid artistic delays with the congratulatory stationery." You nodded, like someone already too accustomed to starring in a hereditary drama with no final act. Minutes later, you were led to the West Drawing Room, where the air smelled faintly of oil paint and charcoal dust. Court painter Sir Aurelius, a wiry older man with a sweeping mustache and ink-stained fingers, bowed to you and Leopold, then gestured toward the canvas. "Your Highness," he said, "today we begin the noble child's hypothetical portrait. The first version will be gender-neutral, easier to modify once the approved gene template is finalized." You hadn't even sat down before he placed a dossier on the table. Combined genetic reference, both lineages. Page 1, potential forehead maps. Page 2, branching nose types. Page 3, standard court cheekbone angles, 14th to 17th century. He picked up a pencil and nodded to himself. "We'll begin with the base, the chin. I suggest chin type 3, a hybrid of the paternal great-grandfather and Lady Lisette of the maternal side. Then we'll add eyes, gentle, yet historically deep." You sighed, resting a hand on your still flat stomach. "Sir Aurelius," you said gently, "I think the baby should look like itself. Not a collage of 8 ancestors from 3 centuries ago." He paused, then smiled faintly. "I understand, Your Highness. But the regulations require the sketch to be complete. The aunts need time to embroider the pillowcases and commission the frame." You nodded. You didn't have the authority to cancel the session. And if you didn't sit for it, someone else might just imagine it without you. You glanced at Leopold. He shrugged and whispered, "We should call it version beta." The two of you sat together as Sir Aurelius drew the chin, the eyes, the nose, the ears, all selected from the genetically approved catalog. The child slowly emerged on paper, a small face, flawlessly symmetrical and somehow distant. "What do you think, Princess?" the painter asked. You stared at the sketch. Your heart stirred uneasily, not because it was bad, but because it was perfect, in someone else's language. You stood, walked over, and gently picked up a charcoal pencil. With a soft hand, you added a tiny mark on the right cheek. A faint smudge, maybe a freckle, maybe just a rupture in the formula. "I'd like to keep this mark," you said. "No need to adjust it." Sir Aurelius nodded, slowly but without protest. Later you sat by the window in your chamber, holding the drawing and looking into the garden. The child in the portrait said nothing, but there was something in its eyes, something oddly comforting. You opened your journal and wrote, "Today, I saw the first image of a child that doesn't yet exist. They called it a fetal portrait. To me, it was a portrait of hope. I added a dot on its cheek, not to disrupt, but to remind everyone this is a real person, not a sample sketch." That evening, you and Leopold sat quietly by candlelight. The drawing was propped against the wall. "Do you think the baby looks like us?" he asked. You shook your head, smiling. "Not yet. But if our child is born, and one day looks in the mirror, I hope they see themselves, not a curated echo of a family tree." He nodded, and the two of you sat silently as if waiting for the child in the picture to enter the world. Not perfect, but real. That morning, you had just settled by the window with a cup of chamomile tea when a servant stepped in, bowed slightly, and spoke in her familiar tone. "Your Highness, The council has scheduled the ceremony of fortified lineage for this afternoon. Lord Leopold has confirmed his attendance. You set your teacup down, eyebrows slightly raised. Fortified lineage? Yes, Your Highness. A light ritual, a family tradition, meant to bless the abdomen where the next generation will form. There will be incense, name recitations, and a touch of hand movement, all quite graceful. You exhaled. In your mind flashed an image of yourself surrounded by wafts of incense like mosquito smoke. But for the sake of family harmony, you smiled and nodded. At exactly 4 p.m., you were led to the ceremonial room on the 3rd floor. The room shimmered with soft candlelight and drifting threads of incense smoke. At its center was a round carpet embroidered with genealogical symbols, ancestral chins encoded in silver and red thread, spiraling like a medieval DNA map. You were invited to sit at the center of the carpet. Today's attire, an ivory silk dress with a specially designed waistband to showcase the blessed belly region. You felt like a parchment awaiting annotation. Around the circle sat 12 elder women, aunts, cousins, great-aunts, each holding a small bundle of burning incense. Lady Margareta, the ceremony's officiant, emerged from the shadows holding a leather-bound book bearing the ritual's title, Invocations for the Purity of the Line. She opened the book, her voice steady yet echoing like a chapel bell. We gather here to cast our hopes upon this noble womb, where the future shall take root. We burn incense from a 1,000-year-old tree to purify worldly dust, and to remind the bloodline that we remain loyal. The 12 women knelt in unison at her signal, lifting their incense high. The smoke spiraled upward, drifting like ethereal strands of unseen genes. Now begins the chant of chins, she said, turning a page. You sighed quietly. You'd heard of chanting saints' names, even sacred verses. But this was a recital of the family's most storied chins. She began. The chin of Lord Wilhelm, strong as a fortress wall. The chin of Queen Beatrix, sharp as no blade could sever. The chin of Sir Friedrich, noble tilt befitting honor. The chin of Lady Isolde, slender, but never weak. With each name spoken, a swirl of incense enveloped you. You sat still, eyes closed, partly from the dizzying scent, partly because you were trying not to laugh. Midway through, Leopold entered, dressed in ceremonial velvet stitched with gold thread in the shape of a family tree. He did not sit beside you. Instead, he stood quietly behind the line of women, head bowed, as if he too were praying, perhaps for your early release. Lady Margareta raised her voice for the final chant. We beseech the spirits of blood and bone. Bless this abdomen with a seed rich in the spirit of standard-bearing chins. If possible, grant a noble nose, deep eyes, and the ability to stand upright, without jaw misalignment. You bowed your head, unsure whether you were attending a sacred rite or a crash course in hereditary theory. At last, the incense was extinguished. A silk cloth was draped across your stomach. Everyone bowed. The ceremony concluded. On your way back to your chambers, you held Leopold's hand. He tilted his head, asking, "You all right?" You nodded. Still intact, just slightly over-perfumed. He smiled. Your chin survived. Didn't start glowing from all the chanting. You laughed. Just a small laugh. But in the thick scent of ancestral smoke, it rang out like a rescue bell for your sanity. Back in your room, you opened your journal and wrote, "Today, I sat in a circle of women while incense danced around my abdomen, and the names of historical chins were recited. I wasn't upset. I just realized they've placed so much hope in a shape, but I only hope my child gets to be a person. You closed the journal and lay on your bed. The breeze from the open window carried the lingering scent of incense through your hair. You exhaled slowly. One day, if you were born, my child, I don't wish for you to have the perfect chin. I only hope you learn to lift your head in your way. The morning after the incense-laden lineage ceremony, a servant arrived again, carrying a scroll adorned with elaborate calligraphy and a ribbon sealed with the family crest. She bowed slightly and recited, "Your Highness, you are invited to attend today's scheduled session of Royal Gate Evaluation, Post-Marital Standardization Procedure." You read the title once, then again, then a third time. But no matter how many times you looked at it, the content remained absurdly clear. You would have to walk down a hallway 10 times to assess whether your gait was properly ancestral. Leopold, busy re-sewing a gold button onto his ceremonial coat, glanced at your expression and asked gently, "Another one?" You nodded slowly. "This time it's about legs. They want to see if my stride carries the correct ancestral essence." He chuckled. "They once made me walk the garden path when I was 12. An aunt claimed my knees weren't noble enough. I had to wear weighted ankle bags for 2 months. You didn't ask further. The less said, the more chance of salvaging your nap time." You were led to the grand eastern hallway, a vast stone corridor polished to a mirror shine. The high ceiling echoed each step like your shoes announced a royal duel. At the far end stood Lady Bernadette, Deputy Mistress of Protocol, wielding her iconic silver ruler. Beside her, 2 assistants, one sketching your walk, the other logging your pace and hip angles. "Your Highness," she said without smiling, "please begin. 10 passes. Keep your back straight, arms relaxed, but not too relaxed. We prefer to avoid any swinging reminiscent of merchant class conduct." You nodded, inhaled, and took your first step. Step 1, not bad. Step 2, slight slip from the overly waxed floor. Step 3, a faint whisper behind you. "She's leaning left." You remained calm, continuing. You felt like a symphony in motion, each note recorded by the exact angle of your ankle rotation. After lap 5, Lady Bernadette raised a hand. "Pause. The heel contact lacks refined commitment. We recommend the weight distribution demonstrated by Lady Isolde. Gentle glide, no stomp, as if walking across imagined grass." You exhaled quietly. Hard to picture grass when the floor feels like the tombstone of genetic expectations, you thought. You continued. Laps 6 through 9. Steady. Focused. By the 10th, you felt like you were floating. At the finish, Bernadette gave a slow, considered nod. "Improved. Still needs practice. Left hip overextends slightly. Likely maternal side influence. We recommend morning book balancing while standing angled. 1 week minimum." You thanked her, not in words, but with a smile that was precisely the socially acceptable amount of noble. On your way back, you overheard a servant whispering, "They say the correct walk can shape fetal bone structure, even transfer character traits." Back in your room, you removed your shoes, collapsed on the bed, and opened your journal. "Today, I walked 10 times down a hallway to prove my left hip was appropriately genealogical. I don't feel hurt. I just feel tired. Because in this palace, they don't just want to know who you are. They want every step you take to remember where you came from." That evening, you and Leopold strolled in the garden. No one told you how to walk. You moved freely, your shoes tapping softly on the stone path. He glanced at you, smiling. "You're walking like a commoner now." You shrugged. "At least commoners are allowed to wander." He nodded. "I like your slightly tilted walk." You turned to him. Tilted left or tilted right? He said, tilted toward freedom. You smiled, and squeezed his hand tightly. If our child learns to walk from you, he said, I hope they won't just walk right. I hope they'll be brave enough to walk away from these halls. You didn't answer. But in your heart, you just completed the most crucial corridor of all. The one from duty to desire. That morning, just as you finished your breakfast of buttered pastries and rose tea, a servant arrived bearing a stiff gold-trimmed card laced with embroidered edging and an inscription in gilt. Welcome to the royal visitation season, ceremony rehearsal for greeting by genealogical rank. You read it once, then twice, then a third time, biting your lips slightly. You turn to Leopold, who was reading by the window. We have to learn how to greet people based on their genetic rank. He didn't even look up from his book. Greet the wrong person the wrong way. That's a crime against decorum. Greet them properly. You avoid a civil war at brunch. You sighed. It's so strange. Out there, people greet one another out of courtesy. Here, we have to consult the family tree before we even nod. You were led to the ceremony training hall, a long stone chamber with a crimson runner stretching down its center. Each seat flanking the aisle had a bust, sculpted likenesses of various noble relatives scheduled to visit that week. The instructor was Lady Isolde, a sharply dressed woman with eyes like needlepoints and a voice wound as tightly as a clock spring. Greetings, Your Highness, she said crisply, are the combined arts of genealogical memory and spinal restraint. You were handed a thick manual titled, Bowing Without Error, Applying Bloodlines to Proper Bending Angles. Page 1 featured a precise gradient chart, 1.5 degree tilt for maternal third-degree relatives. Second, 10 degrees tilt for paternal aunts without noble titles. 3.15 degrees with 3-second hold for barons with less than 25% shared ancestry. 4. 20 degrees with 5-second hold plus left-angled smile for secondary branch elders, possibly former regents. 5. 1 knee kneel, 25-degree tilt, no smile for great-grand matriarchs deemed live-in bloodline monuments. You blinked, beginning to feel like you were learning a highly choreographed dance where a single misstep could cost you naming rights for your future child. Lady Isolde stepped in front of you, pointer raised. Now, let's rehearse. This bust is of Lady Angelica, who once married her husband and his cousin. Greeting angle, 10 degrees, hold 2 seconds. You bowed. She shook her head. Number 2 bent. That's respectful in a commoner's way. Nobility never bows like they're pleading for mercy. You inhaled and tried again. Better, she said. Then she gestured to another bust. Duke Maximilian, connected to your bloodline via a symbolic maternal great-aunt's pact. You squinted at the unfamiliar face. Who even is this? Doesn't matter, she replied. You still have to bow. You performed a 15-degree tilt, held for 3 seconds, and added the requisite gentle smile. Acceptable, Isolde nodded. Though it lacks that subtle, begrudging reverence. You return to your quarters with sore lumbar muscles and the mental fatigue of an entire court ballet. Leopold looked up as you entered. How many degrees today? Nearly 90. Cumulative. He chuckled. I once bowed to the maid of one of my aunts. Had to redo bow training for a month. You opened your journal and wrote, Today, I learned to bow like I was sending encrypted signals to each genealogical faction. Every tilt is a polite nod paired with an ancestral blueprint. And if I bow wrong, I might lose the right to name my child. That night, you dreamed you were at a grand banquet where everyone wore capes embroidered with genetic codes. You drifted from table to table, bowing at the exact angle for the precise duration, until your spine formed a perfect S-curve, representing your house line. You woke up, sat upright, and softly laughed. You turned to Leopold and whispered, "If I bow again tomorrow, I'll ask to bow in my way." Out of kindness, not chromosomal rank. He squeezed your hand. "I'll bow with you, even if they say it's improperly standardized lineage behavior." You nodded, then closed your eyes. And if our child one day bows to someone, you thought, I just hope they do it from respect, not from a genetic spreadsheet. Just when you thought no ritual could be stranger than bowing based on bloodline prestige, a servant knocked on your door holding a thick ivory card embroidered in gold thread, with the shape of a cradle. You opened it. The heading read, "You are cordially invited to the Royal Cradle Viewing Ceremony, the first official cradle inspection for the next generation of noble blood." You looked at Leopold. He raised an eyebrow. "They're admiring a cradle? Not the baby?" You nodded. "There's no baby yet, but the cradle has already been chosen, inspected, blessed, and polished." The ceremony was held in the Birch Room, a whitewashed hall with swaying silk curtains and the faint scent of lavender drifting through the air. At its center stood the royal cradle, perched atop an elevated wooden pedestal and lit by a golden ring of candles, like a relic on display. The cradle was made of deep red walnut, carved with a sprawling family tree around its frame. Every knot in the wood resembled a carefully arranged marriage. The pillow inside was embroidered with standard-issue noble chins. The bedding was woven from Italian silk, steamed with incense for 3 nights to ensure ancestral energy didn't dissipate. When you entered, the room was complete. Aunts, great-aunts, high-cheekboned elder cousins, each taking turns smelling the cradle linens. One woman took a deep whiff and nodded approvingly. "Very good. It still holds the scent of the paternal line. Slight whiff of the maternal ancestress incense, but not overpowering." You tried to step back, but a servant approached with a tilt gauge. "Your Highness," she whispered, "tradition requires the future mother to check the cradle's angle to ensure no genealogical misalignment." You crouched down, placing the gauge against the cradle's side. A tiny bubble slid just slightly off-center. You frowned. "Is it crooked?" Leopold whispered. 2 degrees. Hopefully not enough to disrupt the bloodline's arc. Guests began gathering around the cradle, debating. "The cradle should tilt slightly to the right," said one, "so the side of the brain handling hereditary memory gets more stimulation." "No," countered another. "Tilt it left, to prevent eccentric personality development." You stood in the middle of a room thick with incense and powdered perfume, listening to serious discussions about the ideal positioning for a baby who didn't yet exist, with the intensity of a military briefing. Then came the ancestral energy transfer segment. Each guest was handed a thin thread, supposedly sourced from the robes of a prominent ancestor. They stepped forward, placing their threads into the cradle pillow while chanting and closing their eyes. You were handed a crimson thread. "This is from Lady Ottilia's cloak," the servant explained. "She birthed 6 children, all with perfect chins and 0 post-lunch tantrums." You placed the thread gently into the cradle. For reasons unclear, you felt a faint twinge of emotion. After the ritual, you were invited to sit beside the cradle, to harmonize energy with the gestational vessel. You leaned in, resting your fingers on the smooth, warm wood. And for a second, you imagined tiny hands gripping the railing. A soft giggle in the air. You smiled, not because the ritual convinced you, but because the image felt real for the first time. A child, small, yawning, unaware of lineage. They just need arms to hold them. Back in your room, you opened your journal and wrote, "Today, I stared at a cradle. They said it holds the hopes of generations. But when I touched it, all I thought was, this is where my child might curl up and sleep. No tests, no proving, just sleep." That evening, Leopold handed you a folded square of cloth. "I snagged a corner of the cradle cover," he said. "So one day, if our kid falls off a bike, we can say, 'Hey, you used to be swaddled in fabric worth more than a treasury.'" You laughed and tucked the cloth into your drawer next to the sketch of the hypothetical child. And as you settled into bed, you whispered toward the future, "If you ever lie in that cradle, my love, I hope you sleep soundly. There are no family tree charts, no ancestor chants, just the wind, a soft pillow, and a nap no one needs to evaluate." Just when you thought you'd endured every strange ritual court life had to offer, from assessing chin angles to incense-scented cradle inspections, a servant arrived with the simplest item, a silver hand mirror. She bowed and placed it on your bedside table, along with a folded instruction sheet. Spiritual gene preparation ritual. Each night before bed, gaze into the mirror and repeat 10 times. "I am the continuation of an excellent bloodline. I carry everything my ancestors ever hoped for, and I will pass it on, worthily." You sat on your bed, holding the mirror, staring at your reflection. The candlelight shimmered across the glass, casting a soft halo. You saw your face, familiar, yet no longer so simple. It was a face that had bowed to lineages, walked prescribed paths, sat inside incense rings, and chosen names for lives not yet begun. You thought, "I'm not sure if my ancestors truly wanted this, or if people just decided they did." You tried once, "I am the continuation of a great bloodline," and stopped mid-sentence. Not out of rebellion, but because you suddenly wondered, can someone truly be a continuation if nothing they carry is their own? You lowered the mirror, then smiled faintly, a tired smile, but honest. Leopold entered the room, spotted the mirror, and asked, "Nightly affirmation time?" You nodded and handed it to him. He held it up and looked at himself. "What do you see?" you asked. He tilted his head and shrugged. "A guy trying to remember the 37th grandmother." "Still not sure." You both laughed. He set the mirror down. "Do you want to do the ritual?" he asked. You were quiet for a moment, then replied, "I'll do it. My way." You stood, looked once more into the mirror and said, "I am myself. And if I carry anything from my ancestors, let it be their endurance, not their face." Then, you gently laid a silk cloth over the mirror to remind yourself that not looking can also be an act of freedom. That night, you climbed into bed. Leopold lay beside you, fingers lacing with yours under the covers. The candle dimmed. The wind outside whispered like the soft breath of a newborn child. You opened your journal one last time in this long stretch of strange days. "I have lived a royal cycle, walking with precision, posing as the unborn, greeting others by genealogical rank. But what I'm taking with me isn't a family tree. It's the quiet moments, when I smiled at the absurdity, went silent at the weight of history, and whispered something to me, not for anyone else to hear." You set down your pen and turned off the light. In the dark, you heard Leopold whisper, "Any rituals tomorrow?" You smiled and shook your head. "Tomorrow, we do nothing. Tomorrow, we just live." And for the first time in days of incense, rituals, councils, and inherited expectations, you fell into a sleep that was truly your own. No knocking, no angle measuring. No one asked if the child would have his aunt's ears or her grandmother's cheeks. Just you, Leopold, a quiet room, and the wind-rocking stories that never needed to be passed down.